So I'm here with Jason Fischer, aka JFish, who is a local Portland comic book artist and illustrator and writer and illustrator. Let's try that again.
Okay.
And we're back, and I'm here with Jason Fischer, aka JFish. He's a Portland-based comic book writer and illustrator, and he has a number of comics out. We reviewed here on this channel, Swimming with JFish. If you remember, I will put a link somewhere around here. But recently, the third issue of his comic Terra Flats came out, and it was just so wonderful. So we're going to chat about all kinds of stuff like that. Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, of course.
How are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for joining me here on KGW Comic Pick of the Week.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and so you just released a brand new comic, a third issue.
That's true.
A brand new issue, I guess I should say, of Terra Flats, which was just so delightful and so lovely and so immersive. And I'm bummed that it took me this long to jump on the train, which I feel like a lot of people who have probably read the third issue maybe feel the same way. Can you talk to me a little bit about it?
Sure. It stars two best friends, Pony and V. They live in the big city, aptly named Big City. They're in their early 20s, and they've known each other since they were little children. And they're just the best friends, the bestest friends that you've ever known. And one of them, Pony, is a gigantic demon. She's probably about, 6'4", I would assume, and she has two big horns in her head and huge mane of red hair. And V is based on the Venus of Willendorf, also known as the Woman of Willendorf, which was a small relic from the Paleolithic era, a carving, one of the first, in fact, essentially maybe the earliest known discovery of human craft. It's like a small figurine carved in stone of a shapely woman, and it's just, she has like a very interesting head that's kind of ditted with a lot of dots over her scalp. No features really, no eyes necessarily, or mouth or anything like that, and she's kind of like holding herself. And it's a very famous little figurine, and I kind of had wanted to make a character and a story around this figurine. So V, Pony's best friend, is based on the Venus. And her powers are kind of about like, she's very charming, and she kind of has the gift of gab, and she can tell stories and captivate people. Whereas Pony's powers are kind of more elemental based and are often triggered by her emotional state. So when she's upset, she kind of starts getting sparks that start building up in her horns and through her hair, and she might shock anybody nearby who is kind of getting on her nerves, which happens in the first issue, where a brother and sister are both trying to win V's affections, but they're kind of playing a game at it, and it really upsets Pony, and she shocks them both and gets them out the door.
I like Pony and her calm energy. I feel like I relate to her. She's like from the country, moved to the big city. Mm-hmm. I'm from the country, aka Florida, and I'm now here in the big city, aka Portland. But it was so lovely, and when I say immersive, I mean like in the beginning of the comic, there's like sort of vignettes about each character that you're going to meet in this comic, including the two titular characters, and you like even went through like their Myers-Briggs and everything. Like, how do you get down to that like very nitty-gritty? Is it all just sitting there in your brain?
I guess it's just very casually there. I don't really actually plan stuff like that and think about it much. It's like, they're both V and Pony are sort of different parts of me. I'm actually more of a city mouse myself. I came from Los Angeles. I was born and raised there, and I moved to Portland in 2008. And I have since become slightly more of a country mouse, but I guess it's more of a small town mouse, I guess, is what I'm turning into. But yeah, V is kind of more, she is sort of based on my more city side. Pony is based more on my countryside, or what little I have. But anyway, but her, like Pony's personality and behavior and interests, they're like the sort of the more introverted side of me. They're the more quiet and subdued side. Like V is kind of based on like the more gregarious aspects of my personality, the more stylish and the more flair. And then the other characters that kind of surround them, they're based on a little bit about, my experiences, my personal experiences moving here in my early 20s. based on friends and based on my kind of, when I moved here when I was 24, it was my first time moving out of my parents' house. So it, kind of, this whole experience has kind of fueled a lot of the story behind the characters and the setting of Terra Flats.
So you have been working in comics for a while, and this isn't like your only comic that you have going on. So although it's your newest, you've been traveling around to do signings and stuff for it, but like you're kind of, this is a little old hat for you.
Right, a little bit, yeah. I first started to do what's called conventioning at comic shows back in 2006 was the first time I had a table. It was at the Alternative Press Expo in San Francisco. And that was also the first time that I released what we call just like a zine or a mini comic. It was just like an autobio, just sort of about, a small block of time, a few days, and I just sort of cataloged what I did those days. It was just called Studio JFish #1, whatever. It had like a front cover of me kind of screaming into the air. It was done in MS Paint. I was still working in that old format then, but I've been working in comics since then. Basically every year I've at least done one show a year. Lately I do usually about 4 to 5 shows. I was just at SPX, which is at Bethesda, Maryland. That was last month. After that I did a couple of signings at some comic shops over there on the East Coast with the new Terra Flats #3. I flew over to LA, picked up a car, drove up to San Francisco and did a signing there at Mission Comics. And then I did a signing when I got back home at Floating World Comics, which is sort of effectively kind of my home base. And also, as it stands, they're sort of involved in the publishing and production of Terra Flats. It's sort of part of their catalog, and they publish their own stuff.
That's great.
Yeah.
You guys know all about Floating World Comics, located at 400 Northwest Cooch Street, because I tell you about it every week, because that's the comic shop that I go to, and I often see you there.
We see each other a lot there, yeah. We just, just talk shit about comics and,
And then I wander in and pretend like I'm going to make my own decision, and then I ask usually Jason and Rachel for help because I am indecisive. But so I guess what is that sort of like? If the comic store that you work at also helps you print the comic that you're creating, I guess it's kind of a unique experience, except for when you're creating zines, where you're involved in the whole process from sort of beginning to end.
The funny thing about working at a comic shop and also making comics is I get this total immersion kind of going on where, almost every day of my week is on a regular basis is just my head is filled with comics. And, when I'm not working at Floating World, I'm doing my own stuff where I'm working freelance for other cartoonists and helping them with their comics as, part of my income. And it's when I'm at the comic shop, the funny thing is I'm often not even reading comics. I'm maybe reading a novel. I'm currently reading Garth Nick's Aberson series, which is really, really fun, and I'm really enjoying that a lot. I'll read, I read a lot of novels there. And, I also I enjoy talking to all the different types of people that come in because Floating World is really exceptional in that we get, the staunch Marvel DC readers, and they're not necessarily too interested in something like Terra Flats. Maybe they'll kind of glance at it and they'll kind of think about it, and maybe they'll be a little too shy to actually pick it up. But then there's the people who are fully in for that kind of stuff, who are coming to Floating World, so find the section that's all of our local zines and local mini comics and local, even local big time people who are making stuff still by hand, and or at least just making it independently for the people that love that kind of stuff. And then there's the art house people that come in for magazines and art illustration books and such, and kind of we have a big foreign section, a lot of European comics too. So we get all sorts of different type of people, and it's what I get out of it is I get to talk to all these different types of people that are all here for comics, or at least comic art to some extent, and I get to learn about what people like. I also get to learn about what it is like to be behind the counter and deal with stuff like ordering through the Diamond distribution, which is, it's informed me in helping me to learn how to better advertise and how to better solicit, how to even like design my work better so that shops and new readers will actually be more enticed to pick it up, or they'll see it better when it's on the rack. It's like all these little things I've kind of been gleaning from working at the shop, and it's also just like it's a really just wonderful place to exist and to hang out at.
That's great. We did touch on something that I wanted to ask you about, like the idea of, especially now, like superhero comics are super hot right now. Like people who you never would have thought would be into superheroes or into superheroes, and yet there's still this like very large and thriving, but also niche pocket of people creating what is considered indie comics. And so you operate in that sphere, and that is obviously like an intentional move. Do you feel like there's a way to get what is considered indie art like elevated to the level of which, like, how do we go about that? Why do you choose to be in indie comics?
I choose it because I'm in full control. The draw of making my own work is that, for myself, I've got I have like what I would think of as like a massive tome in my head. All these characters and stories that I've yet to tell that, I'd love to crack the whip and tell a little bit quicker, get, more stuff out there than, I'm currently doing. And there's just so much I want to tell, and I kind of want to just have as much freedom as possible to express myself as much as possible in that way. And it's totally feasible to work with, I know with a lot of my friends in the business, a lot of them work with image, and there's it seems like there's kind of a little bit more leeway and freedom to tell the story that you want to make, and or like working with Oni Press, for example, which I've done some work with them, and I'm currently working on a big book with them as well. Like, it's I'm still getting freedom, but of course with them I have an editor and I have a whole company that is concerned, thoughtful about what I'm making, which is good. But at the same time, it can make things just a little bit more complicated, and a lot more revision work. Whereas, like, I guess with something like Terra Flats, it's a little bit more. I mean, honestly, my style, it's a little bit more stream of conscious. Like, when I sit down to do that kind of work, it just kind of flows out of me very smoothly. And, I do revisions and I do rethink things and edit, redraw some stuff sometimes, but most of the time it's really just kind of like, it's just there and I just put it out. And so I think maybe I deviated a little bit from your original question, but,
No, I think
just
you're
about
answering
like,
it, like it's better for your workflow to not, have a lot of hands in the pot, so to speak. But for some people, it may be better for their work.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I would love to, I've still never really done much work where I'm illustrating something that someone wrote. I haven't really done, a kind of, I haven't done much as far as a artist-writer team up, and I'm interested in that. And I wouldn't mind trying that if there's anybody, think of me.
Terra Flats is done, and you toured for it, and you did signings, and you conventioned for it. And so, what are you working on right now?
So now that issue 3 is in the can, it's sort of kind of the end of part 1 of book 1, where the next part would be 3 more chapters or issues to kind of finish what's called a trade paperback collection of issues. And so I'm kind of drafting that right now. I have effectively the story that I want to tell figured out in my head, and I just have to kind of like put it down on paper and do some thumbnailing. Basically, like, I'll just kind of write like a very brief outline of each chapter, and then I'll go through and just kind of do like I mentioned earlier, sort of a stream of conscious sort of layout. I'll just kind of sit there with paper and it'll just come to me however I think I should tell the story, and the panel layouts and, you know, kind of the poses and such. And so I want to sit down and figure out those next 3 chapters, and then just try to effectively make the first book wrapped by hopefully this time next year. Also, at the same time, I am figuring out the graphic novel that I'm working on with Oni Press. That has, anybody who knows my work and has been following me for a bit, there are people who know about it, and it's kind of still sort of it's still a little bit in the early stages to really divulge right now.
Oh, secrets.
But at the same time, it's kind of been in the periphery, like people know about it. It surprises me every time to find out how many people still know about this project, but it's different from Terra Flats. It's a fantasy-based story with anthropomorphic characters and food, and it's gonna be really exciting and very weird and very fun, I hope. And I'm really excited to work on that. It's just, I've never yet made a big book. I've never made a graphic novel, so it's definitely still a challenge to kind of figure that out entirely, but I'm working on that right now. What else am I working on? I just wrapped up working with Brian Lee O'Malley on the brand new Scott Pilgrim tabletop game. That's the Kickstarter is active right now, so you should pick up your copy.
In the link below.
Yeah. I did like background. Basically what I did on Seconds, his most recently released graphic novel, that little book I did to kind of talk about working on Seconds and the process. But yeah, like I did background art for that, basically. Like Brian drew, you know, he of course wrote it and laid it all out. He did the characters, you know, and then a little bit of artwork besides characters when he wanted to, and then I did the background art. So all the buildings, the interiors, props, food, stuff like that. Pretty much like, you know, it was almost like in a play, if it were like a theater production, like I was, you know, making the backdrops and weapons and such like that. So,
it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, is it? I can bleep it out.
It is.
Exciting!
Yeah.
Yay! That's so exciting. I will put that in there.